Okay, thank you so much. All right, so in terms of this meeting as is being recorded, we ask that you feel free to use the chat box, and but we do ask that you keep your microphones muted. We have Spanish translation today, and Jessica Serna Castañeda is going to be providing interpretation. And those who want to switch to hear the presentation in Spanish can click on the icon that looks like a globe and switch to language. Tenemos una intérprete que va a hacer la presentación en español. Nuestra intérprete se llama Jessica Serna Castañeda y hay un icono que parece un mundo que aparece en la parte inferior de la página y ahí pueden cambiar el idioma al español para escuchar esta presentación en español. Les deseamos una bienvenida y gracias por estar aquí esta noche. Regardless of where you are physically, we ask that you join us in a land acknowledgement. For non-Indigenous communities, this represents a way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous people of the land on which we work and live. It's one way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking UP tribe. The Amamutsun tribal band comprised of the descendants of Indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. I'd like to share that the Native Governance Center provides a guide about going beyond land acknowledgements. They recommend creating an action plan, highlighting the concrete steps an organization can take to support Indigenous communities. This plan will include information and research on the land we occupy, but primarily focus on the following steps. Doing a self-assessment, do a resource assessment, doing our research, outlining concrete steps with specific measurable actions, going public, keeping our plan handy, reflecting on our progress, and always staying humble. So we thank you for joining us in this land acknowledgement and also in developing an action plan. I'd like to invite a student from Wassamil High School, Dahlia, who's going to lead us in an Ancestor Acknowledgement. Dahlia, welcome.
When we talk about land is part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us, and they're around us, all as you all do. Mary Lyons.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. We invite all of you to include in the chat the name of an ancestor that has influenced your story, your strength, and your passion. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to do that in the chat, we'd greatly appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to be providing a welcome, as we've done already. We'll be reconnecting to our history with a featured speaker, Rabbi Paula Marcus from Temple Bethel. We'll be sharing some data from our community and also from national statistics on incidents of hate. We will welcome keynote speakers, Dr. Taunya Jaco and Dr. Ndindi Kitonga. We'll be hearing from students and having a student panel, and then we'll break out into smaller groups to have a community discussion. And then we'll return to the whole group and wrap up. And then we'll be at that point wrapping up and finishing around 8 o'clock. As we continue the conversation today, we know that these conversations and stories can be challenging and may bring up emotion. And so we ask that everyone here take these discussion agreements to heart to ensure any comments are made at appropriate times that are respectful and related to the topic at hand. Let's all do our part to ensure that this remains a safe and welcoming space for all speakers and attendees. And in this spirit, we ask that each of us elevate speaker asks and voices, that we speak and share our own stories, that we monitor equity of voice, and that we listen and uplift from a place of love and compassion. We thank you for joining us and for agreeing to to these community agreements. And now I have the privilege of welcoming our featured speaker, somebody who I've known for over 20 years. I've gotten to work with Rabbi Paula. We actually got to know each other as part of a Peace in the Middle East group at Temple Bethel many years ago. Rabbi Paula is somebody who is an inspiration. She brings so much joy and power to the work in our community. And she currently works as she's worked in Temple Bethel since 1979. She worked as a teacher in the religious school, in the preschool, and as rabbi beginning in May 2004. She is a wonderful, powerful leader in our community, and it is my privilege to welcome our Rabbi Paula Marcus. Welcome, Rabbi.
Dr. Sabah, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. It's such an honor to be here this evening with all of you. I just can't even say how privileged I feel to be in this wonderful community. I'm going to share a little bit of context about history, both national and local, about what's been going on for the Jewish people lately, and that will be a segue into the rest of the evening. I'm hoping, as many of you already know, the last couple of years, we've really seen an increase in several violent anti-Semitic crimes in the United States, including murders in synagogues, kosher grocery store, Hanukkah party, and physical attacks on Orthodox and other visibly obvious Jews, according to traditional garb. We've seen the desecration of cemeteries and anti-Semitic imagery, of course, at the January 6th insurrection. And the thing that I guess I want to say to frame all of this is that while anti-Semitism is a modern term, the hatred of Jews has deep historical roots, and you can find associations connecting Jews with disloyalty and plagues, and that is one of the tropes that we're hearing again, unfortunately, the whole idea of Jews and plagues behind the plague of COVID. I also just want to say that the recent events that happened in Colleyville, Texas on January 15th, in which the attacker thought that by taking a rabbi and some congregants hostage in a synagogue and speaking with, quote, someone that he thought was the chief rabbi of America, which, by the way, we don't have, Angela Buchenwald, who's a rabbi in New York City, who is the first Asian Jewish rabbi actually in the country. He wanted to get her to force the government's hand, and that's another example. And unfortunately, we know that's probably not going to be the last. In October 2020, some of you may have noticed and remembered there were local transphobic and anti-Semitic cartoons caricaturing local politicians, Jewish politician, which was really disturbing to many in our community. Just this past summer, there were Aryan Nation flyers that were posted and dropped at front doors in Aptos that really kind of depicted images of Jews as the source of evil. They were racist, they were anti-LGBTQ+, so it wasn't just the Jews that were being targeted. I want to share a story that some of you may have heard already that is really essential to this whole situation. A number of years ago, we found some Nazi graffiti, some anti-Semitic graffiti at our back door. Unfortunately, it was a parent who found it, of a preschooler who was at our synagogue. And of course, her response was one of fear. And we were very concerned, of course, and we have very good security cameras. And the person who had done the graffiti was actually picked up. And within a few days, I received a call from the public defender, who asked if we would be willing to meet with him to try to help figure out what happened and see if there was some kind of restorative justice that could be engendered in a conversation. And a number of our leaders of our synagogue, including a parent, met with this young man, with the public defender, and with the one of the district attorneys. And we had this conversation about what the impact of that act was, that hate act. And he was overwhelmed and had no idea and said that he had been really suffering and in a very bad place and was having some personal issues in his life, and felt horrible. I mean, he apologized from this very, very deep, sincere place for what he had done, not quite realizing when he did it what was going to happen. And it was really an opportunity for some healing to happen, both for those of us from the Jewish community, from the synagogue, who were able to speak our truth about what it felt like, and for him to be able to see us and feel us and get a true sense of how scared we were by his act. And to me, I felt so grateful to his public defender for reaching out to us in the first place, and for his willingness to come and meet with us. Because, if this hadn't happened, he would have, he could have been punished in some form or other, but there wouldn't have been, this learning opportunity would have passed by, and we would not have been able to find some kind of healing in what was a very, very painful situation. And I think the healing, when we say healing, it doesn't mean that things are going to be pretty and easy. When we say healing, what we say is that we're willing to engage in the work, in the difficult work of what it means to communicate and to really cross that abyss, that divide that is sometimes so difficult for so many reasons. After a couple of years ago, after the massacre that happened in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life synagogue, I want to mention that the first text that came to my phone was from the then local imam, reaching out to me to say, "I'm so sorry for what happened. Please let me know how we can stand with you," from the Santa Cruz Islamic Center. To get that text was such a moment of transformation. Now, we had been working together through our local Tent of Abraham initiative. And so we knew each other. We'd already been doing the work to plant the seeds to have a relationship. And it was so important for us to have that relationship. We had a gathering that next morning. It was on a Saturday during the Sabbath. We had hundreds of people show up to that gathering from Jewish community, outside the Jewish community. We had one Solidarity Shabbat that Friday evening, and lots of people came to show up for us. And I think the key to what I want to really help us understand in terms of healing too, is that when something happens to a community or to an individual that is a hate crime, it can feel really scary to reach out, to initiate. One might feel like, oh, we could be rejected and not our reaching out might not be appreciated. We could be rebuffed. But what I want to say very clearly, if it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference to reach out and to say, I'm with you, I'm standing with you, please tell me what you need. I'll show up for you, because this builds a sense of reciprocal care and concern and compassion. Solidarity is so important. These intentional acts of building and strengthening connection, and recognizing this risk is in reaching out, and the power in standing in that risk, why it's a radical act of healing and resistance to hate. After Texas, we heard from the Quaker community, and I know some of you are here with us this evening. We heard from some of my colleagues, Christian colleagues, Ocean Gate Zen Center. It makes all the difference to be able to hear from people who care about us and to know that we're not standing alone. And so I publicly want to say that is what I try to do in my work, and Temple Bethel tries to do. It's such an important part of who we are. And this evening is a really wonderful example of that. So thank you so much for including me in this evening.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Paula. Thank you for your message, and also for reminding us of how both local and national and international events affect us directly and individually, and they are so close to home. Just so grateful to your leadership and to the powerful message that you shared with us this evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I want to share some numbers with you, some statistics, and I think that Rabbi Paula's message is so much more powerful than any numbers that I could share with you. But I do want to emphasize that in some cases we have to, the numbers are sobering, and they remind us that not only do acts of hate continue to exist, but they have been increasing recently. And some of the examples that the Rabbi Paula mentioned are just some of the many acts of violence and hatred that have been taking place and increasing. And when we look at different, go ahead and, when we look at different sources for this, we could look at a national level. And what we see is that according to the FBI Crimes Report, over the last 2 years, our community has been witness to an increased number of acts of violence and hate against our Black community, our Jewish community, our Asian American Pacific Islander community, our LGBTQ community, our Muslim community, our disabled community, and so many other communities that have been impacted by acts of hate. And the FBI reports that there has been a 31% increase in these incidents and victims, specifically in the area of race, ethnicity, and ancestry. 31%. These these crime reports are seen as underreporting of what's really happening because of the fear factor. So many people do not report when they are victims of acts of hate, but they're also taking place. These acts of hate are also taking place in our schools. In one study, they found that there has been an increase of 25% in acts of hate in schools between the year 2016 and 2018. And in 2018, another report found that most acts targeted Black and Latinx students, as well as those who are Jewish or Muslim. The Southern Poverty Center also studied the focus of these acts of hate, finding that 1/3 were the focus of these acts of hate were related to students' race or ethnicity. When looking at where in our schools these acts are taking place, studies are showing that they're happening in the classroom, in our hallways, in our bathrooms, and other areas inside of our buildings. And as an educator and as a person who is has responsibility of supporting schools to make sure that they are as safe as possible, it is heartbreaking to know that so much is happening in our schools and terrifying and victimizing our students and our staff in some cases. We reached out to our local law enforcement as well and asked about criminal acts of hate in our community. And they also reported that here locally in Santa Cruz, that we've seen almost a doubling of criminal acts here in Santa Cruz County from the year 2020 to 2021. And some of these are acts such as the defacing of the Black Lives Matter mural in Santa Cruz. These acts of hate don't only impact us. They have an impact not only on those directly involved. It resonates with the historical trauma and the brutal legacy of oppression in this country. One of the key areas that we look at when it comes to how students perceive their experiences is through the California Healthy Kids Survey, which is an anonymous survey that we give to students every 2 years. And we found in the last, we give it every 2 years, and so we have data from 2015 through 2019, that about 12% of our students have experienced at least one incident of harassment or bullying based on their race, ethnicity, or nation of origin. And this represents the most common reason for that bullying. And it exists in middle school and in high school. And it is a reminder that acts of hate occur here as they do in other communities. And they give us a sense of urgency. We need to act. We need to deliver on the promise of schools and communities that are safe. And we have to create those safer spaces for our students and our families. And it is really the reason why we organize this event, to continue the conversation about the kinds of things that we can do together to be able to create those safer spaces for our community. I'd like to next invite our keynote speakers who are going to be joining us. And actually, I'm going to share my screen one more time here. And I'm going to invite Dr. Taunya Jaco and Dr. Ndindi Kitonga. Dr. Jaco is a middle school teacher. She is part of the California Teachers Association board member and lead for the Black Studies chapter for the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. And Dr. Kitonga is a co-founder of the Angelus Workshop School, community organizer, published scholar, and a faculty member at Longi School of Music, Bard College. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jaco and Dr. Kitonga. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us, for inviting us into your community. I'm going to share my screen as well, and I just want to make sure that you just see the slides and the slides only. Okay, awesome. See, it's a good thing we had that check. I want to just invite you all in to, as we kind of engage in this conversation, we want to start by sharing our stories. Right? I think our stories humanize us and allow us to connect to one another in ways that we might not think that we're able to. And so I'm going to start with sharing my story, and then I'll let my colleague and co-conspirator in this work, Dr. Kitonga, to share hers as well. This is the United States of America, land of the free and home of the brave. The United States of America, leaders of the free world. The United States of America, we're number one. At birth, dads might buy their daughters pink blankies, stuffed teddy bears, or bunnies, things that are soft and stereotypically feminine. When I was born, my dad bought me a stuffed bull. He said he wanted me to be strong. In his eyes, doing everything he could to make me strong was his way of protecting me when he wasn't around. My first experience with race and racism was from within my mother's womb. You see, my mother is white and my father is Black. And when my mother's parents found out she was pregnant with me, they told her, "Don't bring it into our home." So she didn't. And to this day, I have aunts, uncles, and cousins that I don't know and whom I've never met. Some people ask if it bothers me, but the truth is, you don't know what you're missing if you don't know what you are missing. Then again, I think they're the ones who are truly missing out. This is the United States of America, land of the free and home of the brave. I was born in and grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, good old Polk County. When I was about 6 years old, my friend and I got into an argument, and like most children, we began calling each other's names. That's when she said it, a word I had never heard before. My friend, who was white, called me the N-word. I didn't know what it was, so I did what any logical 6-year-old would do. "I know you are, but what am I?" I shouted back. She laughed, I stormed off and headed home to ask my mother what it meant. And that's when we had to have one of the talks. She sat me down and said, "Sweetie, you're a girl. And unfortunately, some people don't think that girls can do the same things as boys. You're also Black. And unfortunately, some people don't think that Black people can do the same things as white people. So you're going to have to work twice as hard in life to be successful." In that moment, my identity as a Black woman was given to me from my white mother. I am biracial, but that has not been my life's experiences. I did not grow up biracial. I grew up Black with a white mother. The funny thing is, there are no boxes to check that can possibly explain that. I remember walking into rooms with my mother and people would stop and stare. I could see the wonderings in their eyes as to why this little Black girl was calling her mom. In high school, my mom went to back to school night, and when she introduced herself to my teacher looked shocked and said, "Wow, are you her real mother? Does she have any siblings who look like her?" This is the United States of America, leaders of the free world. I'm thankful for my grandparents who were educators that also taught me to value learning. My grandfather would always tell me, "TJ, make sure you take 2 sets of notes, one to get an A and one to get away. You see, he knew that my education would not include me or my history, yet an education is what was required and necessary to have access to options later in life. I didn't get it at first, but then it started to make sense. I needed to study in order to show my teachers that I understood what they were teaching in order to get good grades and to pass the classes in order to eventually graduate. But if I was ever going to develop an understanding of myself, my culture, my history, if I was ever going to cultivate a sense of dignity, pride, self-worth, and value, then I was going to need to go beyond the classroom in order to keep my mind free. I'm blessed to have grown up knowing that there were these systems in place that wouldn't necessarily tell me the truth. It taught me to question, to be curious, and to resist. It caused me to dig deeper to find my identity and to fight for others to find theirs. This can't be America. Land of the free and home of the brave, leaders of the free world. But something about this land just doesn't feel so free to me. And it don't feel free to people who look like me either. It was Dr. King who said, no one is free until we are all free. So where do we go from here? I can hear Langston Hughes asking, what happens to a dream deferred? And like Dr. Maya Angelou, I know why the caged bird sings. I only wish I could ask Miss Harriet, which way is north towards freedom? And where do we go from here? I became a teacher because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to ensure that no student has to take 2 sets of notes. I became an educator and an advocate because I believe that everyone deserves to see themselves in their education and their community, and I wanted to change the system. When I first started teaching, I got the typical questions from my colleagues. What are you? I mean, where are you from? You look so exotic. I love your hair. Can I touch it? Oh, your mom is white. That's why you're so beautiful. I love that show Blackish. You must watch it all the time. Some call them microaggressions. Ibram X. Kendi calls them racist abuse. I call it blatant and acceptable forms of racism within our society. You see, there are blatant forms of racism that are acceptable, and then there are some that have become unacceptable. Yet all I could think of is these are my fellow educators preparing the next generation for life. Bobby Seale said that you can't call yourself a university and exclude whole ethnic groups, yet we do it every day. In our school systems, in our curriculum, in our hiring practices, in our school discipline policies, in our communities, we keep people out. Why? Because it keeps us safe, more civilized. After all, this is America, land of the free and home of the brave, leaders of the free world. They say to know history is to know yourself. It's no wonder why so many of our BIPOC students rebel against a system that refuses to teach them who they are, the truth about where their people are from, or that their lives matter. But what if our BIPOC students were able to see themselves and were able to learn about the brilliance and resilience of their ancestors? What if we were able to find solidarity in our common and connected struggles? What if we were able to come together and heal and support one another as a community? I wonder, could this be an America that is truly a land of the free? Thank you. I want to just thank you for taking the time to listen and to allow me to share my story. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague and co-conspirator, Dr. Kitonga, who's going to now share her story. And I believe she's going to share her screen, yes, so that she's able to move along.
Yes, thank you so much, Taunya. And before I also share my story, I just kind of wanted to affirm something that Rabbi Marcus put forward, since we're talking about hate. I worked at an Orthodox Jewish school for 3 years, and I was also kind of part and working with a Muslim community in Orange County in California. And during our time there, a couple of things happened, and I wanted to kind of affirm what you were talking about. There was often anti-Semitic, Nazi, all sorts of hate that were coming at the school, and that Muslim community was very supportive, always showing up. And it was quite reciprocal, right? And I'm talking about 2004, 2005, right after 9/11. And the Jewish folks would come over, and I remember just holding hands with Jewish folks and Muslims in this community surrounding a mosque to prevent hate. And so this solidarity is not new, it is historical, and we must maintain it. And I did want to affirm that before I do my thing. Okay, here we go. So let me know if you don't see it. Oh no. Sorry, give me one moment. I just had it. I'm gonna stop share for 1 sec.
If we can just take a moment, I'm just curious, while you're pulling that up, if we can just kind of pause and just kind of check in with you all as a community, and just type in the chat, right? What does solidarity look like to you, or what does it mean to you? It's been brought up a few times. Yeah, demonstration of shared humanity. Thank you. Empathy and compassion, beautiful. Showing up for one another, yeah. Listening, beautiful. Prompt expressions of compassion and support, beautiful, yes. And you can keep typing. I'm gonna pass it back. Keep those things in mind as we continue in our dialogue for this evening. Yeah, I see lots of supporting one another, empathy, compassion, listening and learning from one another. Yes. And taking the time to get to know one another. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Ndindi. Go right ahead.
Thank you for your forbearance, and let me know if it's not showing up for you. But here we go. Okay. So what's in a name? Ndindi. Quite simply, it means we waited for you in Kamba. And after being waited for, I was eager, bookish, joyful, funny, geeky, silly, fanciful, but mostly eager, as you can tell. Tony Hitchin is the name of the little white boy who held my hand on picture day in Lansing, Michigan, where my family lived for 3 years as my parents went to college. The other little kids taunted Tony Hitchin. They called him Tony Kitchen because he held my hand. She's black, they said, as they mocked him. I'm not sure why that was a meaningful insult, but 5-year-olds are creative. The teacher was there. She asked the others to leave Tony alone. No one said anything to me. On that day, I understood something that Tony got to be a person worth defending, and that I was not. I was what got to be gazed upon and discussed. Except I'm not something to be gazed upon and discussed or objectified. We returned to Kenya, where I would spend my formative years. So from age 7 to 18, I began to understand what it meant to have a name, to be able to name yourself. And I learned through my mother, who left rural Kenya to find herself after we were no longer a British colony. I learned through my father, who also left rural Kenya to become a teacher in the city. I learned through my family and through each other. And I learned through our language, Kamba and Kiswahili, even the experience of being a language learner in a country I was born in, but I had forgotten about after my 3 years away. I learned to love the place, the land that we demand back. Some that is still owned by white settlers and even the British Crown. People still displaced and disappeared for tea plantations, for some of the tea that we drink to this day every morning. How can you own land is the question that we ask. You nurture it as it nurtures you, a relationship foreign to Westerners. I learned to love the baobab trees, the soils of Mua Hills, so red from rich nutrients, but that was also seeped with the blood of our freedom fighters. I learned of our lives before and through our ongoing colonization, of our joys and as our hopes as people. And I learned through storytelling and dance and art, but I was also living with darkness, a serious condition. Being Black and having a severe mental illness and an eating disorder is a unique situation. 1 out of 4 of us will struggle with some mental health issue in our lifetimes, but only 1 out of 25 of us will live with serious mental illness. Stigma and medical racism claims many of our lives, with Black women being 3 times more likely to die in childbirth, with our pain not being taken seriously, so much so that we're half as likely to receive pain medication if we need it. This is an interesting and rare case where medical racism has implicated fewer of us in the current opioid crisis, a weird positive and a huge negative. But even so, we remain less likely to get treatment for substance abuse disorder when we need it. And that Black strong, that trope, the Black strong woman trope does not serve us. And so I've learned not to suffer in silence. I cannot afford it. It is too expensive. My survival depends on my not being silent. There is much to be learned from the hope and resilience of Syokimau on the left here. The Kamba wise woman of the 1800s who predicted that our lands would be stolen and our ways degraded, but who also gave us deep instructions for survival. And I've come to be invited to participate fully as a member of my community, an honor I cannot take lightly, especially as we work hard to restore our languages and remain connected to the land. I continue to have an insightful teacher in Audre Lorde, who shows me how to speak up. She says, when we speak, we are afraid of our words, and we are afraid that our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it is better to speak. And from Claudia Jones, who's next, who allowed me to question what freedom really means, especially if it does not include the most marginalized among us. And like Fannie Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And in Bell Hook's words, who I've learned a lot about the love of self and the love of people, and a steadfast commitment to my students, I've also learned enduring hope, the type of radical hope that has brought my people thus far. I've also learned from Now, my grandfather, who was finally to receive some paltry reparations for his lands, for his suffering, but he died with his case tangled up in courtrooms in faraway lands. After all he saw in his 117 years, he taught me to reject dehumanization at every turn and to embrace adventure, and many adventures he had. And then I returned for college, for a new life as a Black immigrant. Before this, I was mostly an African person, a Kenyan, a Kamba person. Now I was Black in America, with daily and new indignities, driving while Black, ICE, doctors who were cruel, walking into buildings to give lectures and no one believing that I was the professor. But it's never just a struggle. Like all of us, we want to flourish and build and grow and learn and embrace our full humanity. And so I did. School, writing, Graduate school, undocumented through most of my journey, but undaunted. Recovery, access to better mental health care. Activism, more school, more run-ins with ICE, more healing, all while riding a giant tricycle that my friends still tease me about, but still want to play with. And 8 years ago, we birthed Angelus Workshop, a school, an experiment, a community project, a place where young people can ask questions, engage in their community, project their agency, and make their demands of a world that often dismisses youth. Here we embrace the great teachings of Freire. Students are not problems to be fixed or empty vessels to be poured into. They are and will develop agency. They are and must be full participants in their own communities. And as Freire reminds us quite convincingly, the more students work at storing the deposits entrusted in them, the less they develop the critical consciousness which would result from their intervention in the world as transformers of that world. And I don't ever want to be in the way of anyone trying to transform their reality. And so that means for me that science teaching, at least what I think that I do, that is science teaching, must connect the doing of science to the doers of science, embrace a civics-minded and a sustainable science, uplift an indigenous and a local science, and a science that is honest, the kind of science teaching that understands that both teaching and science are not neutral activities. All this while recognizing that public schools are important institutions that should and must serve all students, and that they don't. And that I must demand better, and that we must demand better. I've learned through doing, through showing up, and like the women and the femmes who wrote the Combahee Collective, I know that every new expression and form of activism that we see today is what they call an outgrowth of countless generations of personal sacrifice, militancy, and work by our mothers and sisters. So when I say Black Lives Matters, it is an affirmation, a prophetic word, a proclamation, a yearning, a demand, and quite simply, we can't stop, we won't stop. So perhaps it's not so much what's in a name, as rich and as important as mine is to me, but who and what I answer to. I'm not just a winding story of psychic and structural oppressions that are emblematic of being Black and female in America. I answer to and for my ancestors before me, the elders that I learned from, the students that I love, the family that I'm committed to, my Black siblings, and all of my other accomplices and co-conspirators, ever embracing not only collective struggle, but revolutionary resilience and my Black joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndindi. Beautiful.
Thank you. And so I know that Taunya and I, we do a lot of work together, love each other, and do so much. And a lot of it tends to look like a more lecture-based, what it is that you would expect to kind of get. But we wanted to do it this way, to think about our own healing. And so we want to give you all an opportunity in the chat before we move on to the student panel to like put in your impressions, thoughts, feelings, musings, whatever it is.
You want them to put it in the chat?
Yes, please. Yes, please put them in the chat. We do have an opportunity for group conversation when we do the breakout. But right now we just want to get your sense, and since we're not in the same room together, just trying to feel this out. What's going on here for you?
We'll just take a moment. Yeah. Thank you. Right, connecting as an immigrant, I see that. Yeah. Entrusting us with your stories. I think that speaks to the work that you all are doing here in Santa Cruz, right? Where you're creating these environments where folks feel like they can share and are willing to take those risks. So also, yeah, our survival depends on not being silent. I think that's really important. Ndindi, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. These are beautiful sentiments here.
I saw normalize sharing stories. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, and I think it's also a lesson for ourselves that it doesn't always have to be professionalized, and we could certainly have delivered that, but I think also that this kind of relationship building and moving forward and thinking about healing, we thought about this as a way for us to move forward beyond just statistics of awfulness. We wanted something else.
Yeah. And also just recognizing, right, that we are, folks are at different levels of education, different experiences and background, right? But it's important that we all take a moment to recognize our own humanity, right? Because a lot of times, especially just in our professional settings, and I feel it's really important to always contextualize things too. Like, let's not forget that we're in a pandemic, right? And we've been in a really divisive political environment, right? And people are stressed and exhausted. And I think it's important to just kind of pause and to be vulnerable and to be human with one another, because that also helps with, not feeling isolated, right? And that's come up and that was mentioned by our rabbi earlier as well, right?
Yeah.
That this is just really important. So before we move to our student panel, we want to just kind of share, our thoughts on how do we heal as a community, right? We can do really great work and we can have great relationships, but then something happens, right? Whether it's to the individual or the community itself. And so how do we heal? Well, and these are just a few. We're going to give you 4. This is not an exhaustive list, right? Definitely want to invite you to share your insights and what you feel is needed as well. But I think one of the things that we must do first and foremost is prioritize creating a sacred truth space, which you all are doing right now, right? And what we mean by sacred truth, right, meaning that I'm able to come and I'm able to share my truth, recognizing that my truth might make someone feel uncomfortable, right? That it might stir something up in you, right? Or, it could be offensive, right? Depending on how you're hearing my story. But I need the space to be able to share my truth, right? These are my experiences. This is how I'm experiencing the world. And folks need to be able to share their truth without being criticized or corrected for how they're experiencing life. Right. So I think it's really important that we are intentional about creating these sacred truth spaces for folks to come together to be able to share their experiences, very much like what we're doing right now. Right. And doing that, right. Ndindi, you want to talk about the next one?
Yes, I think listening, which is something I remember and thinking about myself as being introverted through my whole classroom experiences and as a learner, and never being affirmed as somebody who was listening deeply I think listening is a skill that is something that we should all get behind. And this is kind of what this one is about, like really like deeply listening for understanding and not so much for a comeback or to be like actually, or to litigate, or to listening openly. It is a complete skill set and a way of being that I think is something that can be fully embraced, and that's something that can really serve us, right? When there's new and challenging information learned, or even when, like for instance, I'll be quite frank, I talk about it doesn't bother me at all at this stage, but I do talk a lot about my mental health and all of these types of things often. And sometimes what I get is like, oh my God, I feel so awful, blah, blah, blah. That part of it hasn't been as important to me as somebody who is like, oh, I just heard you. And that was it. It's okay to just listen and not even need to offer anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and with that, right, we're responding to challenges with compassion, right? Like, we don't know what folks are going through. You don't know what it took. Even right now for this evening, we don't know what it took for people to get here, right? You don't know what someone went through throughout the day to log into this space, you know, we don't understand, right? And so when someone is opening up and they're sharing and we're listening, we're trying to understand, you know, and then at some point, some things do require a response, right? But we want to respond to the challenges with compassion, right? And humanity, right? And being considerate of the other person. And then the final thing, the last but definitely not least, the taking collective action. Ndindi, you want to talk about this one?
Yes, and I'll give you a chance as well, because I think this one is important to us. The listening and the compassion, it takes us to so far. And then after this place, I think it's important for people to say who've been historically harmed or who need something, to make a demand and say, hey, we would like something. And I think it's important as part of meetings to really come together and say, hey, we are taking some collective action. We, as a group of people, want to do something. And for that to be pretty concrete, not so much like we feel it, but we want to do something. And so I'm always encouraging people, like, at the end of your meeting, what were the action items? Who's doing what? How can we support that? And what have you? We're not gonna make it on vibes. I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. I mean, some people, because here's the reality, right? Some people they're just like ready to take action right now. Something happens and their immediate response is, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes you do have to respond immediately, right? There are things that have to happen. But we're talking about healing, right? Holistically, we're trying to be considerate of whole individual people, right? And so we do need time to process, right, what has happened. So going back to just the example that I gave about we're in a pandemic, right? And there's this collective trauma that we've all been experiencing that we haven't really had an opportunity. We've had to respond really quickly to things because it was just necessary. Kind of like when, you know, everything shut down 2 years ago and educators, we had to switch to virtual, like put everything online and everybody switched to virtual. We responded really quickly, but we haven't necessarily had a chance to take a step back and process, you know, how that has made us feel and, you know, what we've gone through as a result of a pandemic, right? And so, you know, but when it comes to, there's that, but just how do you heal when there's harm, right? When there's this trauma, when there are acts of hate that have been committed against an individual or a particular group or the community itself, right? How do we heal, right? And we do need time to do these things, to listen and understand to one another. But at the end of the day, right? Okay, now what, right? Where do we go from here? And how do we feel like we are actually taking steps, right, to be victorious and not just get into a space of being the victim, right? So I want to make that distinction, right? Us talking about what's happened doesn't mean that we're kind of wallowing in being the victim, but at some point we need to transition out of that, right? So with that said, we also feel it's really important. We're sharing our stories. We also want to lift up our student voices, right? Our youth. You know, it was Frederick Douglass who said it is easier to build strong children than to repair grown men, right? And I'm a firm believer that it is our responsibility as adults to not just model, but to support our youth and to really surround them in love and to cultivate them and help them to build as whole individuals. And so I want to introduce to you all, I have Dahlia from Watsonville High School. We have Taunya from Watsonville High School and Kalia from Harbor High School. And before we start off and they get to introduce themselves a little bit more and we get to meet them a little bit more, I also just want to really take a moment to affirm, right, that these are our young people, right? These are our future, they're our leaders right now. I don't want to say future leaders, they're our leaders right now. And they have taken the initiative. They have various projects that they're working on that they've taken on in addition to their schoolwork, right? They have their own families and responsibilities, right? And they are taking this initiative. And I just want to say, as a teacher, I'm incredibly proud of you. I don't know the details of your day-to-day life, but I'm incredibly proud of you. And so just want to encourage you all who are joining us to really just surround our young people with love, okay? Yeah, we want to surround. So welcome, Dahlia, Taunya, and Kalia. I'll give you a moment. You can introduce yourselves as well if you like, if you want to add on, but I want to just kind of start the conversation, right? With just very overall, what are some of the challenges that you are experiencing as a student in classrooms, right? In your classroom or just in our community at large? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? And now I'll pass it over to anybody who is excited to start, or we can call on someone. Kalia, can you kick us off?
Yeah, of course I can. So hi everyone, my name is Kalia. You know, one of the challenges I'm currently facing in school is just how am I being represented? You know, I come from two Mexican parents who came from Mexico, and oftentimes I relate to other students as well who are from different racial groups, because I feel like we all often share the same struggles in school. And when we talk about social issues and other issues during school, I feel like sometimes teachers do not understand us because we want to share more beyond what's being taught to us, because we're like, we understand this, you know, this is what we go through on a day-to-day basis. And the struggle that impacted me the most was when me and some other student were trying to share. Our teacher completely shut us down and was like, oh, kind of trying to teach us what we already know and what we live through every day. And that impacted me. It made me feel a certain way because I'm like, how are you going to teach us something we face every day? And we want to expand more to teach you as a teacher or other students, or just to be heard, you know? And that really impacted me negatively. And it kind of hurt because I was like, wow, like, I feel like you're trying to teach me that something I already know. And I just wanted to expand more on it, but that just completely shut me down. And was kind of scared to continue talking in the class and share my experience or my ideas, that it just made me feel unheard and just weird in that class. And that was my struggle that happened last year during COVID online. Yeah.
Thank you for being brave and for sharing your truth. Taunya, what are some of the challenges that you are experiencing, whether in the classroom or in the community at large?
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Taunya. But relating to what Kalia was talking about, I think a big challenge that we are facing right now is seeing that the material that we are being taught in class isn't relating to minoritized individuals. So like, for example, most of the authors of the books that we are reading in English class is written by individuals who aren't minoritized, and it just doesn't widen our perspective. And I feel like in our spaces, we need to feel safe and heard, especially in our schools, and not having material that we are able to relate to doesn't allow us to be heard, like Kalia was saying.
Hello, my name's Dalia, and to add on to what Taunya and Khalil were saying, I agree that some of the materials that we're given at school don't represent our voices, and in some cases we don't have any material at all, and that like lack of resources in classes just lessens our opportunity to be able to build up the blocks, because as a minoritized individual, we often have to work as twice as hard, and if we don't even have the resources, there's it's just a lot harder. So one of the challenges I'd say is underrepresentation in like our materials and lack of materials overall.
Well, I want to thank you all for sharing those experiences with us. And so kind of what I'm hearing is there's silencing sometimes when you express yourselves, that the content doesn't necessarily meet the mark. And so we're going to go ahead and ask the second question that I think will offer more insight. And maybe I'll work, is it okay if I work backwards? So from Dalia, Tanya, and Kalia. So the second question here that we have is, how did you gain consciousness about these issues specifically? And can you kind of pinpoint a particular experience? If not, that's okay. But I think the second question is, how did it occur to you that what is going on in the classrooms that you participate is not the full story, that it doesn't meet the mark, that it's not satisfactory, and that you would like better? And so I'm going to start with Dalia, if that's okay.
I'd say one of the biggest eye-opening experiences would have to be during the pandemic, during the school year that we had. For me personally, like my classes were a lot shorter, and my teachers weren't able to fully expand on topics, and being like the lack of resources during the pandemic really like hit me. Like I didn't fully understand concepts because there was lots of missing perspectives in literature and in history. And I'd also say like I'd have to do my own research to figure things out. And of course, that's always something important. But I do think that our educational system should reflect the actual education we should be receiving. And I just think that during the COVID-19 pandemic, my education really shifted how I viewed it. Like, why wasn't I receiving more perspectives from different teachers, from different communities? And that would be the biggest experience I'd say so far, educationally.
Yeah, I can go ahead and go next. So, like Dalia was saying, I think the pandemic was a big factor in me realizing the lack of perspectives and representation that there is in our material that we learn in classes. And also, I'd say for me, it was like throughout all my years of high school, I haven't read a book like in one of my classes that has represented me or for any fact, any minoritized individual. And I feel like that's a big issue.
I realized that there's a lack of perspectives, like Tanya said. Last year, IB was introduced to our Harbor High School, and they were trying to expand on having different perspectives, learning about like apartheid, learning about Chicano studies, and that's when I realized there's a lack of perspectives on other schools, because I know in Harbor, compared to other schools, we're often not learning the same things. Um, but even though we're expanding more on trying to learn about different parts of the world, um, I feel like it's all surface level. We never go into detail. Often those questions that we do have, we have to find the answers on our own, or we see it. I see it through social media, things that I'm like, I didn't know that. And I feel like I teach myself more through trying to invest more in myself, like through social media. I think that's the greatest outlet that I'm learning off of, because there's so many different posts every day, um, and information reaches me more. But I feel like everything else within school is very surface level. That's how I realized last year during COVID, was that we're not really expanding on our learning. We're just learning the most basic things that teachers are willing to teach us. Um, but yeah.
Thank you. You know, you each in your own way have kind of expressed this desire for more, right? There's something that's not quite right or something that's missing, and that there's this desire for more. And I know you all are working on various, projects and initiatives. Can you share what actions you're taking to find solutions to these challenges? Can you talk a little bit about those things, or even what you would like to do? And then, how does that make you feel to be able to take action? And I'm going to start with Tanya first. I'm going to kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, so right now, the problem, actually, starting off, I'm actually working on my problem with Kalia. So we can both just like say our side of our stories. But the problem we are focusing on is the fact that in our communities, there our juvenile hall rates are really high, especially for minoritized individuals, and we see that as a problem because it's affected our community and also us personally. But what we have been doing to attack that problem is we were a little while ago, we actually presented to the Mental Health Advisory Board, and with our presentation, we had various interviews with people that were involved with the juvenile hall system, and also people that went through the juvenile hall system, just to see the various perspectives of individuals that are experiencing the juvenile hall system and what's going on and what the problem is and how we can fix it. So with that, we presented to the Mental Health Advisory Board, and we got positive results, and we got a lot of feedback on what we could do to address the problem and fix it. And right now we are actually working on getting an interview with the new chief of police, because we want to see what his perspective is on our youth and how he's going to help this problem in our community, and just, I guess, his plan of action.
No big deal, just getting a meeting with the chief of police to solve disparities and disproportionate rates in our juvenile system. No big deal. These are our high school students, people. Sorry, I'm getting excited. Kalia, you said you're working on your project with Kalia? Yeah, Kalia, you want to add on to anything that she shared?
Yeah, she did amazing sharing that. I just have to praise her for that. As she mentioned, we are trying to get in contact with the police chief, ask questions related to youth and juvenile hall. I have Taunya, I've reached out to Dahlia. Um, I'm hopefully, I think this will amplify youth voice, and I feel like this will help youth in juvenile hall. That's my plan as a commissioner. This year have joined the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission, and my goal is to amplify that youth voice, actually help youth who are in juvenile hall, not but what I think, but what they think. I feel like their voices are very important, and I'm just trying to reach out to them and just let them know we're here, we hear you. I'm here to help you. That's pretty much our mission with Taunya. We just want to help them create a better environment. Let them know that that's in the works right now. But yeah, I'm just hopeful that this will get started and we're gonna see more impact on youth.
Beautiful, beautiful. Dahlia, what types of actions are you taking, or would you like to take to resolve some of the challenges that you are experiencing or that you've witnessed?
So currently I've for the past year I've been working on the problem I'm focusing on is about the authors of the material given in high school and also just throughout the elementary system. And I'm focusing in the PBSD school district. And I've been talking to lots of teachers from different elementaries, from different high school levels at Watsonville High, and just gathering data on what they think the problem is and why they think it's there and what steps they're personally taking. And I hope to present my data and a possible solution to the PBSD school board soon to try to get this conversation started, because even though it is a big problem just in the United States education, I do think that if we start a conversation at a smaller scale, it could lead to a larger level scale. But yeah.
Yes, we completely love this, and I hope everybody who's here loves this and loves this for youth. I'm quite excited. And I think that the projects going on here need to be celebrated so much. We're also going to push on a little bit forward and ask you all a question of how do you want to be supported? That question of when do you feel seen and heard? So it's a little bit of a personal question. What type of things restore you, build community for you? How do you feel connected and how do you feel joyful? Because it's clear you have it on lock, and yeah. And maybe I'm gonna work, can I do Dahlia and then Kalia and Taunya? If you're ready, okay.
I'd say personally over the past year and throughout the beginning of the pandemic, just finding a community where you feel safe, even if it's a small group of friends or a trusted adult, just to be able to talk about your perspective on different issues, I think is very important. And then have an open space. I think that's the most important, having somebody to listen to you and have reinforced communication. I think it's just an important place where you could I could personally build myself up and also just learn. And I think that's something very important, that it's a good support system to have.
Personally for me, I feel and heard when they're really interested in. That's pretty much how I feel seen heard. It's like pretty much when the people are really wanting to be invested, they're like, how can I actually help? And that makes me happy because I feel like we could always move something forward to change something, even though it's small. I feel like that's a great change and a big step forward to changing our community. And I feel like I love working a lot with the community, and I'm always invested. I feel like just knowing that I can make a small change, even though I'm one person, or I can help be part of that big change with a lot of people, that's what makes me happy.
Okay, one way I feel seen or heard, I'd say, is being represented. I feel like that really gives me hope, which is how I kind of restore after everything, and just having hope that the work that we're doing in our community is meaningful and it's going to impact our youth and our minoritized individuals in a meaningful way. I feel like gives me it just makes me feel I guess seen or like heard.
I don't know about you all who are listening, but I'm truly inspired by our youth leaders right here. The fact that you not only recognize the challenges, right, but you're not just complaining about them, right? You are actually taking up space and taking action. That you are thinking critically about these issues, that you're collaborating with one another. I'm inspired, right? And I'm here, I'm listening to you all, and I'm like, wow, they're amazing, they're phenomenal, right? Like how brave and courageous you are to just try to tackle systemic inequities. Like I'm blown away. So for all of us who are listening, right, this is our last, we're going to wrap up right here before we are able to dive into some conversations as a community, right? Give us our directions, right? What are our marching orders? Tell us what actions we need to take. So what is your ask of the community in this session? What would you ask of them? And don't shameless plugs are okay. If you want to drop your Venmo in the chat and say you can donate books.
I know that's right.
There's no shame, I will send you money right now, but I'm just saying there's no shameless, no such thing as a shameless plug. But what would you tell us, right? What's our ask? What would you ask us?
I can go first. I think I would like to ask people who want to be invested, want to involved, just to show up, especially in the Juvenile Hall Commission meetings. I know there could be, the public can speak on whatever they want to say, how they feel, and I feel like showing up to those meetings means a lot because I feel like their voices matter. Everyone's voices matter, of course. And just for us to understand what the public needs, what youth need, I just think that showing up helps me learn a lot. It helps me expand more on what I can change and what I can do to make the goal that everyone's hoping for. And so that's why I ask, please show up, please support in any way, good or bad. But I just need to know how can we move to a great step in the future or in the near future.
Thank you, Kalia.
I can keep on going with what Kalia was saying because I strongly agree with her words. I think keeping the conversation going is what we need to do, and making sure that we're finding ways to hear our minoritized individuals' voices, because I think that definitely leaves an impact on them and it makes them feel seen and heard.
Beautiful.
I definitely agree with like what Kalia and Taunya were saying, just like having like listening and being willing to have those conversations, I think are really important. And I ask the community to like ask questions, like if have these like simple conversations with a family member, a friend, because even the smallest conversations can really start opening up new ideas and lead to bigger conversations.
Wow, I'm blown away, and I want to just say thank you so much for sharing your truths and inspiring us with the work that you are doing, and also giving us a call to action as a community, right? To not only continue the conversation, but to listen and to show up. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So can you all just give them a nice emoji, a heart, hand claps, a round of applause? We love you. We appreciate you. Keep on leading, being bold. And we're going to turn it back over to our leadership team that's going to take us to our next step for this evening.
Thank you so much. Geez, I'm just blown away, inspired. I'm at a loss for words. Thank you so much for our amazing students for sharing what is you're working on, what challenges you're facing, and the asks that you have made of the community of how we could support you. I'd like to ask everybody to please in the chat if there was anything that you heard that you liked, that was inspired you, that moved you. Please put your appreciation in the chat in appreciation of our youth who were here to speak their truth and to connect with us this evening. I have to say, I often think about the challenges that we face in education and in our society, and when I hear the voices of our students, I know how bright our future is. Thank you for inspiring us, for moving us, and telling us the things that you're going to be changing. So appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again, and let me go ahead and get to the appreciation screen. And so you see a little appreciation page here. Thanks again to our students, and of course to our wonderful presenters, Dr. Jaco and Dr. Kitonga. Thank you so much for your powerful message. We're going to be moving in at this point to a kind of a new part of our conversation, which is going to be some breakout groups. We're going to be asking folks to be thinking about we're going to have about 20 minutes for this conversation, and we're going to be breaking up into smaller groups for community conversation. Si necesita traducción en español, les pedimos que se queden en la sala principal y les vamos a agregar a un grupo de habla hispana. So for our breakout discussion, we are going to ask you the following questions. How might we respond to the asks that the students shared? What are the structures we can put in place to restore, repair the harm that has occurred? How are we creating spaces that foster connectedness? And what healing practices might you or we want to adopt or explore? And so we're gonna be putting these questions in the chat, so they will follow you into the breakout room so that you'll be able to continue with those conversations as we get into our groups. We just want to remind you, of course, that of our agreements to elevate student asks and voices, to speak and share your own stories, to monitor equity of voice, and to listen and uplift from a place of love and compassion. And so in a moment, you'll be receiving an invitation to join the breakout group. We ask you to please accept that invitation. Y otra vez, si desea participar en discusiones sobre estos temas en español, les pedimos que se queden en la sala principal para ponerles en ese grupo. And I'm going to ask Melissa to please open up the breakout groups for our 20-minute conversation about the questions that we have asked you to discuss. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for participating in the conversation, and just want to say that if you would like to send a message in the chat to the folks that you were in a conversation with, please do so if you have any messages that you'd like to share with your group. And hopefully your conversation was fruitful and a positive experience for all of you. You know, we've come to the last part of our event tonight, and you know, I'd like to take a moment really to thank everybody who has been a part of the conversation tonight, especially to our keynote speakers, our very special featured guests, and our students, our wonderful students. So wonderful to be able to share the space with you. I do want to ask I have a small request for you, which is to complete the feedback form, and we're going to put the link in the chat for you to be able to give us some feedback, and so that we can continue to work on these equity series. This is an ongoing series that we have in a variety of different topics, and always with a theme of equity as the guiding principle, and kind of looking at it from different dimensions and different ways to learn from each other, to hear each other, and always an opportunity to uplift student voices. And so we ask that you please share your feedback, and also a form, the notes from your input in the breakout groups are going to be shared with educators and educational leaders as we kind of continue to learn together as a community. I would like to give a big shout out also to our equity team, Melissa Roberts and Celeste Gutierrez, Debbie Bodenheimer, Sony Sanson, and Leanne Reyes, everybody who's involved in helping to create these great opportunities for our students, Berenice, Valentin as well, of course. And a special thanks to all of you. We're so grateful for you to have joined us this evening, to have these conversations, and just continue the conversation, continue to work on behalf of our students and our community. I'd like to ask for a volunteer to share this wonderful quote. Celeste, would you like to share it read it for us?
Sure. Let me turn off the heater. Gratitude and closure. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign. But stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that dignity.
Tonight, the theme, and this was Shimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and this quote, I think, really kind of epitomizes the power of stories. And we heard some amazing stories tonight from Rabbi Paula, from our wonderful keynote speakers, Dr. Jaco, Dr. Kitonga, and of course our wonderful students. And so one more time, just gratitude to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for listening, for sharing, and we look forward to seeing you at our next equity event. Have a good evening, everybody.